Thank you for that lovely opening words. So first of all, I would like to respectfully acknowledge the traditional owners of the land where we're meeting here today. The traditional owners of the land around Brisbane are the Jagera and Turrbal people. So it's a privilege to be standing on this country. And I'd also obviously like to welcome everyone in the room. Thank you for being here today. I know it's a busy time of year, so we're very, very glad to see such a good, strong representation. And also thank you to the people who are joining us remotely. I always get a bit nervous about the remote activity, just in case it fails, but Carly's done a great job in making sure that everybody's really hot to trot on that particular technology. So I need to cover a couple of housekeeping issues before we get the proceedings underway. So obviously breakfast at the back, tea and coffee over there, toilets out here in this corridor to my right. If there is a fire alarm, God forbid, make your way back to the reception area, and the fire warden that will then lead you out of the building and to the place where you'll need to congregate so that we can actually tick you off and make sure that you're out of the building. So I do have a few further thanks and acknowledgements, so I'll need to read this out and make sure I don't forget anybody. So we do want to extend our grateful thanks to our generous sponsors. Those are Grant Thornton auditors, Matt Bell, Simon Hancock's, Abby Callamakanthan, Ian Brooks are here today. So thank you for providing pro bono audit services. You'll see the results of their work in the annual report. And also for hosting events and ongoing support. McCulloch Robertson's, obviously, Troy Webb. McCullochs have been a long-standing supporter of CHIPs for Queensland and very generous and kind to us. So we really do appreciate their legal support, pro bono work, and for hosting us today. We're also very grateful to Idea Architecture, Transfield Services, SDM Housing Software, and I know that Bruce is here today somewhere, so thank you very much for that. So I do want to say that without the support of both the members and the sponsors, CHIPS just wouldn't have been able to keep going. So what the sponsorship allows us to do, obviously, is to make connections with business and community. So it's more than just giving us money or events and things like that. We actually do want to build those strong relationships as part of those sponsorship arrangements. But it also allows us to keep the membership fees affordable, particularly for smaller providers. And many of those smaller providers are the providers who may benefit most from stronger connections into the rest of the community housing sector, to business and community, and to the events that we co-host with the department as well. So we're extraordinarily grateful for that. It allows us to do things like today where we can actually get together and network as well as fulfill some important business on behalf of CHIPS. So thank you to the people from M3 Media for enabling us to connect with members across Queensland. My nervousness in no way reflects on your ability, it's just about me, so thank you very much for doing that for us today. For those of you who are watching the broadcast, you can participate in the upcoming Q&A session by posting your questions on the online upstream chat facility. So please make full use of that. It's a great opportunity to have. I will extend that welcome to everybody who's here today, members, associates, guests, and of course our very special guest speakers. We have Ms. Liza Carroll, the relatively new Director General of the Department of Housing and Public Works, and John McInerney, who is the Chair of the Community Housing Industry Association, CHIA. So thank you very much for making yourselves available today. We're very much looking forward to hearing from both of you about better housing outcomes for Queensland and a renewed policy focus at the national level. So just before we introduce our keynote speakers, we do have a short presentation. Well, it's not very short, presentation for you, just to really showcase some of the innovation that's happening within the community housing space. When we sought contributions for this particular segment, we were overwhelmed with the amount of interest that was shown, and also the amount of innovation that's going on a day-to-day basis in the community housing sector. So I learnt some things that I didn't know, which of course is one of the reasons for CHIP's existence. But we won't have time to go through all of those projects in detail today. So our intention is to make a feature of those on our website and also invite other contributions, because I'm aware that these projects today are simply the tip of the iceberg in terms of innovation. So where's Kylie? Yep, she's there. Okay, so can we get cracking? Oh, sorry, I'll just turn to one side. So this project is through Common Ground Queensland. Most of these projects are in partnership, and it's the Employment Training and Volunteering Programme, as you can see there. The partners in this are obviously those 4 dot points there, so TAFE, Many Ways Forward, Riverside Hotel, Brisbane Convention and Exhibition Centre. And this initiative really is about connecting people into both the skills and the support and the employment opportunities. So it's a great project. Kylie? Thank you. So, as I say, I won't go into all of the detail there. You can obviously read it for yourselves, and it will be onto the website. But one of the things that I do want to highlight is the bottom dot point there, which is about the partnership with community volunteers as well. So that brings a whole richness and strength to the sector, and individuals get huge benefit from that. But it has some really practical outcomes, of course, as well. And so because we are a little bit short of time on these, I wanted to really focus on the outcomes, and particularly the bottom part of that slide, which identifies some really, really great successes. So 9 tenants in employment, that's to be celebrated. 11 are enrolled in study. 10 have taken up volunteering, which of course is often a pathway into work. And then others who are in the first stages through connecting with employment services of getting into employment. So, and then 5 tenants with a certificate 2 in business administration. I think it's admirable. It's a great result. So thank you for that. The next project is the Churches of Christ in Queensland, the SPIN project. So again, a partnership project with the Department of Housing and Public Works, the Ipswich Youth Service and Max Employment. And this is about really trying to share and reduce living costs to make connecting to the community and being in a housing environment which is affordable, not just in terms of the rental level, but in terms of many other of the living costs as well. And it's really targeted at young people. And of course, that's critically important. If we get young people well housed and connected into opportunities, then they will be the drivers of opportunity later, rather than the recipients of support services and welfare services later. So it's a great project. Again, I encourage you to look at these. Kylie, yep, thanks. So thanks to the department for providing the property, to Ipswich Youth Service for providing case management services for each tenant, and Churches obviously for providing property and tenancy management. So this is one of a number of projects which look at the services which are reasonably have reasonably low entry costs. So gardening and mowing, as a social enterprise initiative, but that coupled with the training and employment. So it's always looking to the future. And of course, Churches of Christ do pride themselves on their ability to access chaplain support, and often that can be the difference in somebody connecting in or not connecting in. So that's again a great aspect of the church's service provision. So again, back quickly to the outcomes. So 4 tenants in the first 8 months of the pilot, 1 in the private rental market, 1 fully employed, and 1 in full-time education, and a second project plan. So again, we're seeing really, really tangible results for that innovation. And then we move quickly on to the next one, which is another Churches of Christ in Queensland project, the SafeLink Tenant Mentoring project. So thanks go to obviously Brisbane City Council, their housing and support program, which has funded a number of really great initiatives over time. And this is a joint venture with Group 61, who support people with mental health issues. So obviously you can see the purpose there. So it is connection, but it's practical support as well. So they've matched 21 tenants with volunteers. Again, churches do a great job in recruiting and retaining and training their volunteers, and matching those volunteers who are trained in that field. So it's a great isolation breaker with, again, really tangible outcomes. All of those: social isolation, antisocial behaviour reduced, increased tenancy sustainment capacity, community engagement, and that individual approach to tenants as well. The next one is the Brisbane Housing Company, BHC, and their new development in Kagera House. And I actually had the pleasure of going around Kagera House quite recently, which was great. So again, a partnership with the Department of Housing and Public Works, and the initiative for this really came about because of the realisation that there were many, mostly older people, living in what was formerly the family home, living alone, finding gardens and the whole house thing just too much, and wanting to move to more age-appropriate accommodation. So Kagera House does exactly what it says on the tin. It provides brand new housing accommodation for those people, and it also then releases up family homes which can be reallocated through the housing register. So 57 one-bed apartments with universal design, so it's just important to note that as well. So it's another great project. And then we have Young Care and their share house at Wooloowin. So again, another partnership. There is a theme emerging here. So Wesley Mission, the Queensland State Government through a land grant, and the Master Builders Foundation with a $300,000 donation. So obviously a very substantial cash donation there as well. And this one again is about age-appropriate accommodation, but this time for younger Australians with high care needs. And these are the people, obviously, who, if we invest a small amount in now, will be contributing members of the community for many years to come, we hope. So the features of this that I think are interesting are that housemates are supported to engage in activities that are really relevant to young people, so trying to make it responsive to their needs and desires and their dreams for the future. So the middle dot point I think is really, really interesting. So I'll read it out just in case those people at the back can't see it. But in less than 2 months, one of the housemates, who for the past 13 years has been non-verbal, on a soft diet and showered exclusively in a shower bed, began to speak, is now on a full diet and is now sitting up to shower in a shower chair. So that's a remarkable turnaround, really, really worthwhile. And now we're moving on to Horizon Housing. So Horizon have been very busy in developing affordable housing for key workers and partnering with the Western Downs Housing Trust. So this really is about meeting the housing needs of local residents and key workers in Miles, which, as I'm sure you know, has a very changing housing market, pricing some of the locals out of that market. So it's great that the Regional Council got on board with that, recognising the need and developing a strategy, which is often the first place to start. So the outcomes of that, you can see here, 1 1-bed, 2 3-bed, and 3 2-bed and 4 3-bed townhouses. So it really has added both to the age profile of the housing stock in Miles, but also in terms of the housing diversity. And this again has a long-term benefit for that particular community in Miles. So, okay, so please look at those on the website. There will be more posted, and again, I encourage you to add. Let Kylie know of the innovative projects that you've been involved with too. So again, I'd like to welcome the Director General of the Department of Housing and Public Works, Liza Carroll, and I would like to now ask her to make the keynote presentation. Thank you.
Thanks very much, and it's great to be here this morning. It's great to see so many of you. I've met a few of you as I've gone around over the last couple of months, but I look forward to meeting more of you. And I hadn't been warned that it was going to be video conference, so but that's fine. I'm not worried about that. I'd also like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners on whose land we meet and pay my respects to elders past and present. Obviously, the work of community housing is critical to the work of housing more generally, not just in Queensland, but right across Australia. And I thought what I'd do this morning is just to talk about a few of the key pieces of work that the Department of Housing has going on at the moment, and then obviously leave plenty of time for questions, because I think that is where we get to have a better and more valuable engagement. There's 3 key policy areas that we're working on at the moment. Obviously, there's lots else going on at the same time, but those 3 key things are we're developing a new housing strategy. We've got work going on around federation reform in the Commonwealth state space, and also we're internally reviewing all our housing policies for fairness. The 2015-16 budget statement talked about the development of a new housing policy. The strategy is going to reflect the Queensland Government's objectives for the community and thinking about the integration of housing as well as homelessness and the other breadth of social services as we go forward. The aim of the strategy is to look at the key elements that we need to focus on as we go forward, but also look at the other pieces of work that are going on at the moment. So we're taking into account the Advisory Task Force on Residential Transition for Ageing Queenslanders and the work that they do as it goes forward. We're looking at the analysis of the Senate inquiry into housing affordability. We're also looking at the implementation of the findings of the Domestic and Family Violence Task Force, and obviously looking at the ongoing implementation of the regulatory system for community housing. We're also mindful of really key matters. One of those, and I'm sure you're all thinking about it, is the National Disability Insurance Scheme. And now that in Queensland we have a launch site and we're on the road to implementing the National Disability Insurance Scheme with the Commonwealth, we need to really stop and think, what does that mean for housing? And we're certainly internally doing work with our Department of Communities colleagues, but we need to have a broader conversation with all of you as well. We're also thinking about the work that's going on around national welfare and tax reform, and as I mentioned, the reform of federation. It's envisaged that the strategy will set the direction for an integrated housing and homelessness service system. The development of the strategy's got 3 phases. The first phase, which we're in at the moment, is the development of a discussion paper. We'll then use that discussion paper to go to consultation and get feedback from a broad range of groups across Queensland. And then obviously the third phase is implementation. To help prepare the ground for this partnership approach across government, industry and the community, we've developed an external reference group, and Gina Pearson is the CHPs for Queensland representative on our reference group. And the reference group is also made up of other key human services focused peak bodies. That includes QCOS, LGAQ, Q Shelter and the Queensland Advocacy organisation. So they're just a few of the people that are on that group for us. And the work of that reference group is to help advise the department of the approach to our consultations when we get there, what will be the best way to actually do those consultations, and also to have input on the discussions paper's key themes and what are the key things that we need to be engaging with. We've also been looking at the key themes and have drawn on conversations that the department had with key stakeholders in regional engagement workshops. Those workshops happened from November last year through to May this year, and we talked to over 500 people across Queensland through those workshops. The key themes that have come out of those workshops that we're looking at in terms of our housing strategy are people at the centre. That's not a surprise to everybody in this room. A responsive support system and improving people's housing choices. Collectively, I think these themes open up the conversations that we need to have about the housing strategy into the future. The people at the centre, many of you will have heard the Minister talk about housing as a human service, putting that into context. Exploring what that means. What does it mean for the way we do our work? What does it mean for the tenants? What does it mean for the people, other people that we work with? What does it mean for the system that we work in, that human service system that we sit in? Obviously, another concept is the better services, identifying the opportunities to better meet the needs of people. Better services come from integration, collaboration, as I could see on all of those slides. Collaboration is key. Clearly those outcomes are formed by not working in isolation, working with others and collaborating, and that's really how you get the outcomes. The third concept is housing access and affordability, and this is one where I know the community housing sector is always thinking, what is it that we can do, both community housing, government, industry, to think about how do we kind of leverage the resources we already have, how do we bring in further investment and take advantage of new opportunities. Clearly, the role for community housing and the non-government sector is key in all of this. It's key in terms of the support side as well as in terms of the infrastructure side. We expect to be consulting on that housing strategy early next year. As I said, we're just going through the development of the discussion paper at the moment. Until then, we'll continue to work closely with peak bodies and representatives in finalising our discussion paper. If I talk then a little bit about federation reform, many of you have probably had a read of the draft discussion paper that came out earlier in the year. Some of you might question about how much reform is actually in that draft discussion paper, and I won't make any comment on my former Commonwealth colleagues who wrote that particular paper. But certainly what it does, the whole federation reform process, is about thinking about where are the Commonwealth and the state both involved, and clearly the very big areas like health and education take most of the time. I think what we collectively need to focus on, and certainly in the department we're looking at, is how do we make sure housing and homelessness isn't the forgotten bit, the balancing item at the end of a big discussion, because clearly the issues around health and education, where there's very significant financial investment on both sides, is going to be where a lot of the energy goes. As will things like tax reform, and you see that kind of every second day in the paper, and also the whole question about intergovernmental governance. How does it work? How does COAD work, etc.? just to summarise, the three options that were in that draft discussion paper that came out earlier this year were extending Commonwealth rent assistance to public housing tenants and therefore ceasing all of the other Commonwealth state housing agreements, of which there's quite a few, retaining the current funding model but bringing in greater accountability, and transferring Commonwealth rent assistance to the state governments to implement, and again ceasing all other Commonwealth state housing agreements. In July at the Leaders Retreat, the key outcome of that was to have a focus around making sure there wasn't duplication of spending and that there was the kind of best assistance possible. We're certainly engaged with our Department of Premier and Cabinet colleagues because this is a COAG process, so the department is indirectly involved through the Department of Premier and Cabinet. And we're looking at these reforms that have been put on the table for us, but also seeing what other reforms we can possibly get on the table through that process. I think, as I'm sure many of you in this room, it's really important to engage in that process as much as possible, because I think the more voices that are there, especially for housing and homelessness, is key, because it is one of those things that we need to make sure isn't forgotten at the end of the list. I think there's some good signs though. Recently the new Treasurer highlighted concerns about both rental and home ownership affordability and talked about new solutions, the need for supply and provision of social housing, and I was really encouraged by that. So I think that means that issue about housing affordability hopefully will be in the mix as we go forward, and can lead to having a fuller housing reform agenda rather than just one focused on particular payments. As I said, obviously the community housing sector is a key player in all of those discussions as we go forward. The third element I wanted to briefly touch on is the review of housing policies for fairness that is currently going on. So the government made an election commitment around reviewing all the current housing policies and having a fairness test around that. What the department did was it looked at what is all the correspondence, the feedback we've been having, either through letters, through our housing service centres, lots of other mechanisms, and thought about what are those key policy areas. We ended up with, there were 9 key policy areas we thought really needed to be considered in terms of fairness, and really analysing each of those policy areas. So thinking about the sort of behaviour policies, leave time away from the tenancy, all of those elements. What are the things that we need to have as a policy going forward? So we're in the process at the moment of looking at all those housing policies, things like the antisocial behaviour policy. We're also taking into account the feedback from the Mental Health Commissioner in their report and kind of what's the perhaps unintended consequences of some of those policies, and are going through that process of review at the moment. I'd anticipate by the end of the year we'll be able to announce some of the new policies in that area. I'm sure all of you are aware one of the very big ones is the rent policy as well, and that's obviously will take a lot of time because it does have an impact in terms of the revenue for the state as we go forward. But we have created a fairness test, and our objective is to use that fairness test for all policies into the future. Just before I close, I just wanted to talk a little bit about community housing and the importance of it. Obviously, the Minister's made it clear that community housing is an essential part of the system. She hasn't, as she's moved away from some of the previous government's commitments around how much of the kind of current social housing that's run by the state government will be pushed out to the community housing, but that's not because she doesn't see community housing as a key partner and a key partner in our work going forward, and a key partner in all of the directions. She wants to use the housing policy work and our strategy work to help inform what's the direction that we should be going, knowing that community housing is a key partner, and what's the best way for us to go forward, and what are the other partners we need to be looking at, like all of those examples. How much do we need to work together? What are the key things that we can do, and how do we really leverage a system together into the future? I think the key for me is that, you know, community housing now has been here for a long time, and successive governments, both at the Commonwealth level and at state level, have really promoted and increased the value of community housing. I understand that in Queensland the property portfolio is worth over $1.2 billion, which is a kind of a really significant component. In the department, we're in partnership with you. If we're not in partnership with you, the system's not going to work. And so we need to make sure we take that approach as we go forward. It's been great to be here and have this opportunity to talk to you this morning. I think that the landscape's an exciting landscape, and there's things that we can do together. And as mentioned, it is a policy landscape. It is thinking collectively together, what are the steps we can take and what's the direction we want to be. So thank you, and I'm very happy to take questions.
Okay, so thank you very much, Liza, for that very interesting presentation. We do have a little while for some questions, but I need to please remind attendees that if you do want to ask a question, if you can put your hand up and get the microphone, in that way the attendees remotely can hear. And also, if you are attending remotely, please type your questions as well, if that works for you. So, go. Who's first? Don't be shy.
Liza, good morning. Charles Northcote from Blue Chip. The integration of NDIS with communities and the Department of Housing, there's a huge amount of capital. Oh, that's okay. Huge amount of capital that's required to come in and invest. Capacity is going to be the key issue for the community housing sector to be able to engage in the sector to actually deliver what we need to do right across nationwide, but Queensland as well. How is the department at this stage, or maybe they haven't got a view yet, going to engage with the sector for the NDIS?
We haven't got that far down the track as to working out our engagement strategy, but rest assured we will be engaging. We're really trying to, we're still at the very early stage in Queensland of trying to work out what funding will come and what will that look like. So we've certainly been talking to New South Wales and Victoria that have a schedule attached to their National Disability Agreement that talks about funding. So I'm sure, as many of you are aware, early on there was discussion about, I guess, a capital fund, which we were all very excited about. But now that that's not on the table, effectively what comes is a kind of an individual funding mechanism. And what we really collectively have to look at is how will that work in Queensland? So in New South Wales, I think they're relatively comfortable with that model because of the system in New South Wales and what they're trying to move from and to. And in Queensland, we're still trying to get a handle on kind of what, well, we don't have that funding schedule yet. So what do we need to make sure we get in that funding schedule? But then how do we engage? What does that look like, and how do we use it as we go forward?
Director General Vaughan Pete from Australian Red Cross. Two questions, if I may. One, is there a web address that we can look at on your website regarding the housing and homelessness strategy? And secondly, in terms of the MPAH, I've noticed that Queensland and Commonwealth have both signed. We have some contracts that expire 31 December, so we've currently got staff and who may not have jobs in the new year. I'll be very grateful to know when the sector might find out what programs are in that scope and not in scope. Thank you.
I'm just looking to see if Mel's here. Mel might be able to answer the second part of the question for me.
We have recently just finalised our negotiations and agreement under that program with the Commonwealth Government. So we are internally finalising our project commencement, and we will be able to let industry know very shortly the results of that. So it's very, very shortly. As you know, we extended the contracts out to December to give some assurity and just see us over this time frame. Because of the negotiations being protracted with the Commonwealth. But we certainly are very aware, very cognisant of the staffing issues and the need for that. So you'll hear from us very shortly. Oh, definitely. Yeah, definitely.
So, and the first part of the question, sorry, now I've forgotten.
Web address.
Web address.
Yeah,
so we don't have a web address just yet because we're still in the developing the discussion paper stage. But as soon as we do, we'll certainly send out through CHPs for Queensland that discussion paper and the mechanism for you to have input and obviously how we'll be doing those consultations early next year.
Director General, I'll go again. It's great to see that you're looking at strategy because it's vitally important to understand what the key focus areas are. But I would just make the statement that strategy is really resource allocation and pursuit of a mission, and it's therefore very vital that if we have a broader shift in policy and strategy, that resources shift appropriately. So in the current macro environment where the government's only trying to increase their budget by 2.9%, that will obviously be a balancing act. So that's more of a statement than a question. Liza, cheers.
Yes, thank you. And we do recognise that, and clearly that's one of the big challenges is thinking about how do we really engage with the Commonwealth, because they're going to have the biggest levers for us in this area. And the kind of current words of the Treasurer, the new Treasurer, hopefully that will maybe turn into something as we go forward.
Thank you. My name's John Eastgate. I'm from 99 Consulting, and we work with quite a lot of different community housing organisations. I'm wondering, you talked earlier about partnership. My observation in dealing with things in the last couple of years has been that the communication tends to be really one way, that there's a lot of the department telling organisations what they need to do. And I wonder if in your various review processes you're giving thought to some of your partnership mechanisms and communication mechanisms, both at a regional level and at a statewide level, and how if you've got any thoughts at this stage about how that might play out and perhaps make that a bit more of a two-way process.
Yes, and that's a really good point. So we actually, the Minister's already started some of that at a macro level. So she's got a kind of a consultative committee that has met. She's looking at establishing an affordable housing expert reference group. There's a few things that at the macro level definitely are happening, but at the local level, what we're certainly working across Queensland at that local level to start think about how do we establish those local level consultation mechanisms, communication mechanisms. And I know it's quite variable region to region. I went and visited the Chermside Housing Service Centre, and actually our Chermside Housing Service Centre leader brings people together at already, which is a good kind of first step, and encouraging her to do more of that. And what I need to do is make sure across Queensland we have similar mechanisms that start to be established and cemented in as we go forward.
Liza, there's a question that's been forwarded from some of our members before the forum. So this one just says, what would you like to see more of from community housing providers?
Oh, that's a tricky one.
That's why I thought I'd share it with you.
I mean, I think certainly meeting the community housing providers and having an understanding of community housing from the past, I think the key is actually continuing with those partnerships that we saw the examples of. How do we actually, as community housing providers, as the kind of state government and other local providers really continue to do that, because clearly that's where the outcomes and results are. And what we need to do as government is free you up from the kind of funding constraints to say, oh, you can only use your money for that and not for that, and those sorts of things, to allow those partnerships to happen much more freely. But it is about that partnership approach, which I know you're already doing, and so I think that is the key to outcomes.
Thanks. Good morning, Director General. My name's Jo Ahern and I'm the General Manager of Compass Housing, and thank you very much for your presentation today. My question just concerns the fairness test that you mentioned, and I think that it's very positive that the department is actually taking these steps. But one of the issues that we deal with in Compass Housing is the eligibility criteria that are applied to our transitional housing program and to our tenants, and there's a constant churn of tenancies as a result of the criteria and how they can be applied. And I was just wondering, in relation to the fairness test that the department has developed, would it be possible to get some more information in relation to that, and whether the eligibility criteria are forming part of that test? So any more information would be helpful, so thank you.
Yep, definitely. We can get some more information, and I think thinking about how that test applies across the board more broadly is a really good point.
Director General David Cant, BHC. You made one of your 3 key points, the white paper on the Federation, and clearly it could have huge implications. Do you have I know the Prime Minister recently said he was probably not going to call an election till September next year. Do you see that process sort of coming to some kind of clarity before that election, or there's no sense of timing at the moment? Do you have a view about any of that?
No. Sorry. I think, look, I guess the kind of engaging with my Premier and Cabinet colleagues and talking to Dave Stewart, who's the head of Premier and Cabinet, they really don't have a sense. The bureaucrats meeting haven't really got a sense, and I think the new Prime Minister hasn't actually worked out where he needs to be. Clearly the funding balancing item actually sits with the what are you doing on the tax side. So I think the broader discussion that's starting to surface about what are we doing on the tax side actually means that they are likely then to start thinking about what to do on the other side, but they need, and they've said if they were going to change the GST or any of those things, they take it to an election. So I think that'll be the balance. Do they take a whole package to the election of, if we're going to collect these extra taxes, these are the things we're going to do with them? That's really the question, but part of the problem is the fact that you need the money.
Can I have a supplementary as well? When I've spoken to you about the reform options, you stressed that Queensland could be disadvantaged by option number 1 because of the way the capitation works currently and the stock numbers relative to population and so on. If there was compensation for Queensland, would you be attracted, would the department be attracted by that option reform number 1, the CRA coming to public housing?
I think we're still really trying to work that through, because obviously in its current form, as you said, Queensland's hugely disadvantaged. We're the most disadvantaged state in that model, just because of the way the funding shares work at the moment on a population base. And effectively what you get in a CRA model is it's on how much public housing do you have that's currently not attracting community Commonwealth rent assistance. I think what we're trying to do is actually work out what would that mean and how would it work. And where we're starting to think is, if you started to go down that track, but the Commonwealth actually had the levers in what were the rules around rent assistance, then that's also problematic. So really you need a bit of a reform of rent assistance before you'd be willing to go down that path. If rent assistance came with a more of a regional approach, a levy on need. So say if someone has significant drug and alcohol problems, or mental health problems or things like that, then perhaps they attracted a bigger sum, a little bit more like a NDIS style of model without going totally individual. Then in fact it could be attractive, but in its current flat form, I think we'd be very nervous about it.
I've got a question from online, actually. Sorry, around the back here. Do you see a need for small and large CHPs in Queensland? And how do you ensure that smaller community organisations do not get swallowed up in partnerships with bigger state and national players?
I definitely see a need for small and large. I think a healthy market of having kind of all sorts of players in the market is actually what we need. We need everybody in it together. I think it's a good question about how do we make sure, and we as government need to look at what are the things that we do, incentives or otherwise, that would make people think that they need to be part of. We're only really interested in very big players. But I also know that at that local level, and having been to some sort of smaller communities, been in Bundaberg, been in Mount Isa, in fact, what's needed at that local level is a local organisation. So we certainly are aware of that and need to think about what are the things that we do.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I'd just like to ask Kylie, please, to step forward, just in case someone doesn't know her. I don't know where you've been if you don't, but Kylie is the Executive Officer for CHPs for Queensland. Thank you.
So Liza, as a small token of our appreciation for you coming along today, we would like to present to you a donation to a charity you're particularly supportive of, Assist a Sister. So we're very grateful for having you here today. Thank you.
Thank you. So moving right along, we now have, I have now lost my place. My apologies. Here we are. So we do thank Liza for her contribution today. It's been great that she's been able to spend so much time with us, given that we know how busy she is. But now we would also like, or I would also like to introduce John McInerney. John is chair of the Community Housing Industry Association, CHIA. Their ethos has a great deal in common with CHPs for Queensland's aims and approach, and we're obviously supporting that initiative through CHPs for Queensland, and have had a number of discussions with John regarding that. So please welcome John McInerney. Thank you.
Thank you, Gina, and it's a privilege to be here. And thank you, Lisa, for your very informative comments about some of the things that are on the go at the moment, and I'll probably touch on some of those as well. What I want to do today, I think I'm going to talk for about 10 or 15 minutes and take some questions, but I'll try and give you a little overview of who and what CHIA is. I hope people have heard of it, but for those who haven't. But then I'll sort of try and move into where we're at and some of the issues that we're dealing with at the moment too. But CHIA is an old idea that's just come to fruition, really. It's been talked about for many years, and I first heard it talked about, I suppose, in about 2009 under a former organisation, CHUFA, the Community Housing Federation of Australia, which was a peak of all the peak bodies in Australia. And I know I was a delegate from Victoria to that body at a national meeting in 2009, and a very long and vigorous debate led to this idea of why don't we all sort of come much closer together and change our structure and merge. 5 years later, I'd retired from my position as the CEO of one of the larger housing associations down in Victoria, and I'd recently retired, and I was approached. We've got a working party on this CHIA, and it's got some momentum. Would you come in and chair that working party and make it happen? And it's probably a 6-month engagement. That was July last year, and I'm still battling, so it's taken a little longer. But jokes aside, we have made a lot of progress, I think, and we've had some setbacks too. With obviously, when we initially started meeting, we had a national body, CHUFA, still existing and funded by the federal government. It was defunded announced in December but effective from June this year. So that made our task of bringing the state peaks into closer alignment much more difficult. But nevertheless, we are persisting and we're making progress. I suppose the big aim of CHIA is to try and give community housing a brand, a common brand name that's recognised and see it as a sector. Rather, we all know what it is. All those who've lived it and worked in it for a long time know what an interesting industry is and how all the good little things that are happening all around the place. So many things. But I think we've really undersold ourselves as a sector. We've never really asserted how effective we are. I don't think governments have given us total credence for what we have achieved. And I think that's what's driving CHIA, is that we want to have a brand, we want to have recognition, we've got a solution we believe, and we want to sell that solution, and we want to partner with organisations and governments and the private sector to solve this housing problem. That's what CHIA is all about. So it's really important, and we would hope that the future sees each of the federations adopting the name for a start, and we've got so far only CHIA Western Australia, but we're on the way to getting CHIA Victoria, and we have a situation in New South Wales that's quite difficult, where they've voted to merge into CHIA, but then they haven't agreed when and how, so that's fairly difficult, but I'll talk a little bit about that too. But the idea is not to sort of diffuse or do anything less at a state level. That's not what we intended. It's more that we come together, we start seeing ourselves as a sector, we start sharing our resources, our IP, much more fluidly between each other, and we become much more successful. And we also, when it's necessary, we go, and especially I suppose, and I'll talk about it in a minute, go to federal government to try and get the policy levers addressed so that we can do our job better. We do that collectively, and we speak for the whole sector, and we have a joint position that we developed through proper structures to get those joint positions. We also go to industry, and to me, the obvious solutions, we need a lot more housing, we need a lot more money invested in housing. It's not all going to come from government. We're going to have investors and stuff, and financiers. And I think as a sector, we've got to go and sort of negotiate those deals, not with one little agency here looking for $1 million or a little agency there looking for a few $100,000, but as a sector looking for, big, proper investment opportunities. And I think that's how it's going to happen. So that's the sort of broad aim of CHIA. To represent the sector. We also recognise that community housing's developed at a different pace in different jurisdictions, and when I say jurisdictions, I mean states. And some states are very advanced, while others, I'd say, are in some instances a couple of years behind the leading states. We want to see that corrected. We want to see all the states have sophisticated organisations within that state to promote and assist the development of community housing organisations. So we're really conscious that, and especially states like the Northern Territory, ACT, Tasmania, some of those smaller jurisdictions, that we help them get organised as well. That's certainly one of the aims. But it's not really about doing anything less. And when I come and watch a presentation like today, all the localism, that's not the stuff that CHIA is going to be directly involved in. That will stay at a state level. I think that's done best at local organisations and even the training. What CHIA needs to coordinate is, I suppose, the bigger picture stuff, the national stuff. Having said that, where we're up to at the moment is that over the last 12 months, we have adopted a new constitution, and we've transitioned the old CHUFA, that entity which was an incorporated association made up of the state peaks. We've had a vote back in March here in Brisbane where we voted that to transition into a company limited by guarantee, and where the housing providers become the members of the national organisation. Our proposed model is that when someone joins the national organisation, they also join their state branch, and half of their membership fee goes back to their state branch. We've been really clear following our consultation across the nation that states didn't want to do anything less. They didn't want any of their resources drained off into a big mega central office. So our model very much is any money that's generated in the state, and I mean that whether it's through a contract with the state government to provide a service or do something, or whether it's through a sponsorship, or whether it's through some fee-for-service activity that a particular state does, that money stays in that state. It doesn't go to the central office. The only money that goes to the central office under our model is 50% of the membership fees. We now have established that constitution. We've established the central office. We have a board made up with representatives from all the states. We will have elections next April. Under our model, there's one regional director from each state, and then there's 4 national directors, which we would see as people that represent the whole country, and hopefully some people with particular expertise will stand for those positions to come onto that board. It's a rather large board, but it's because it's a national organisation. We would hope that in each state where we have members, we have a state committee that advises that director and deals with state issues, but it's under one governance structure. That's the model we've adopted. We've signed up now about 107, I think was the count as of last Friday. 107 organisations have joined. We've been very fortunate in that 22 organisations, and a couple here from Queensland, have actually contributed funds as become foundation members to help us in our startup phase, because it's quite difficult starting up an organisation with very limited funds. We've just been through a pretty lengthy recruitment process, and we're just about to announce we've actually offered a job as our first inaugural CEO. Was offered last Friday. We're meeting with that person tomorrow to finalise contract details, and that announcement will be next week when those contracts are finalised. So we'll have a Canberra-based person working from Canberra. We've got a couple of part-time workers. We've got an office, like I said, the Western Australian Federation have signed up. We've got an office over there. And we're sort of in negotiations with both Victoria, the peak there, and also New South Wales with a hopeful transfer date where they transfer their business into the new structure in June the 30th next year. We're really deliberately and very cautiously in states where there wasn't or hadn't been an overwhelming, I suppose, support or knowledge of what we're doing. We've haven't gone out and recruited in those states. We've actually it's been our very conscious decision to do that through the existing peaks. So here in Queensland, we have been in dialogue with CHPs for Queensland about how we do a transition. We'd rather do it properly rather than quickly, I suppose is our thoughts on it. But we're keen to do it too. I won't hold back from that. We would like to see CHPs for Queensland become part of the CHIA structure. But we want to get it right, and we want to make sure that that Queensland organisations feel like they've been well served by CHIA and by their state body as well. Certainly an issue that was raised and very strongly with our fee structure here in Queensland was our fees were considered to be quite high, and I don't make an apology for that. It's just one of those unfortunate circumstances. We don't have federal government money at the moment. We're trying to raise the money to run the national office from membership fees. We have set the fees mainly based around per property. The more properties you manage, the higher fees you pay. But there's a set amount too. We had that set amount of $500 per annum plus $5 per property. Those fees are then split between the national office and the state office. Queensland made the point very strongly. Francis was a delegate and made it on numerous occasions to us, and we have listened. The small organisations, that was a big heist. So we've dropped it to $200 per annum for organisations managing less than 25 properties. So the smaller properties will have a cheaper entry point. But we do need to generate funds too, and we don't want to be totally reliant on government. Our activity at the moment, we've already hit the ground running, and as Lisa mentioned, the Federation discussion paper that we released early in the year, we've done, I suppose, 2 position papers on that. One's quite an extensive, long paper that's been submitted to uninvited, but we've submitted it back to the federal government already. We've also released a paper just the week before last, a discussion paper with the intent purpose that each state would then conduct some discussion with its members about some of the implications of those potential options that were put up, and some of them we think are quite backward in terms of where we're going. CHIA runs a very, very strong line that the solution is about more housing. It's not about cutting up what we've got into even thinner slices and trying to distribute it to meet everyone's needs. That's not going to happen. We really, this goes my phone, who's forgot to turn it off? So we're very much pushing the position that it really is about a supply issue, that we really must come up with strategies, and the federal government must come up with strategies that there is more affordable housing out there in the marketplace. We think very strongly that it can't be relegated to one level of government. It needs a joint and coordinated approach from both federal and state governments. It would be, we think, disastrous just to push it onto state governments. They're more hamstrung for finances than the federal government. The federal government already generates, has more capacity to do things. We're also very, very conscious that there's been 70 years of funding under the previously the Commonwealth State Housing Agreement, and these days under NAHA. There's a lot of accumulated assets over those 70 years. We think that it's incumbent on the federal government to make sure those assets aren't used for any other purpose than for social housing. Now, we believe those assets can be used much more effectively and much better, and there's real urgent need for revitalisation of estates and things like that. Unfortunately, many states have become places of entrenched disadvantage, and we think that there's a much better way to do things. They're the issues we're pushing through our discussion paper. It's available on our website. I really invite people to have a read. I'll be talking to Gina and Kylie over the next week or so about convening a forum here in Queensland, so that Queensland agencies, and we're just not talking to members, we're talking to all agencies at this point in time, can provide their thoughts and feedback, so we can have a considered position to take back to the federal government when the green paper is finally released, and when we think a consultation process is coming. Like Lisa, we take great heart in things that the Treasurer, Scott Morrison, has said about housing. In his brief tenure as Housing Minister, we had a meeting or two with him, and since he's become Treasurer, he's made it clear that he understands how important housing is to the national infrastructure, that it is it's a big ticket item in the whole welfare, education, employment. If you don't house people properly, you've got all these other problems, and he gets that, which is a promising thing. So I think I'm not pessimistic that he is going to come out with some approaches. Obviously, we would like to see the federal government, and maybe through its tax system or through some other mechanism, provide some incentives for people to invest money in affordable housing. We've had an incentive system, a very strong incentive and a very successful incentive system in Australia to get people to invest in rental housing, in negative gearing and the capital gains quirks, I suppose, that come with investing in rental properties. But unfortunately, it's been skewered to the high end of the market. The more, it's almost the better suburb you can buy in, and the more you can afford to spend on your investment property, the safer bet it is. So people do tend to invest as far along the market as they can afford. There's no incentive to invest in low-cost housing or housing that's rented out at lower levels, and we would like to think at times by social landlords who aren't in it for the profit too. We would like the government to come up and give some incentive schemes. Well, obviously the NRAS was one of those, but unfortunately that got stopped. We don't know why. We understand that it was a program that had its administrative difficulties, but it was still a sound idea, and we still support the idea. We think it could be done a lot better. They're the sort of issues that CHIA is really trying to run with at the moment. but we're pretty thin on the ground still. Like I said, we're a committee of people, dedicated people, I dare suggest, but we're trying to get the structure behind us now to speak for the whole sector. I'll probably leave it at that, but I'm happy to take any questions if you want to do that too.
Questions, anyone?
Thanks, John. David Kant, BHC. It seems to me there's another very vigorous and worthwhile association in Australia on social housing, power housing. Can you just explain the way in which you see CHIA collaborating with power housing?
Yeah. We've obviously having ongoing discussions with power housing, and I see them serving a very similar agenda to us. Obviously, power housing has a slightly more refined membership base that they see themselves as just representing the growth providers. We see ourselves as representing the whole sector. But it's our hope, and at this point in time, that they're where our main focus is on policy and trying to influence the national policy debate. I think their main focus at this point in time is on networking and getting agencies to share information and operational issues. It's my personal view that I think that our interests will coincide. The members will decide that, and it's testing at the moment. There's 28 agencies that make up power housing. I think 20 of those have joined the CHIA to date. So people are paying 2 membership fees. I think at some stage they're going to say, well, can this be done better? That's my feeling. That hasn't happened yet. So far, people are happy. And all that we've made a commitment to do is to keep in a constant dialogue. I certainly talk to the chair of power housing quite regularly. We have we don't want to duplicate work or compete in the marketplace. We want to work collaborative, but that's what's happening at the moment. But there's no formal. We are trying to merge the state peaks. We're approaching state peaks. We believe all the state peaks have very, very similar aims, and we think we can be best served by being one organisational structure, and potentially one back room and coordinating our conferences and our training and sharing IP. We see that as the first stage, but I personally think that over time that the members will decide. But it wouldn't surprise me if there's some formal merge with power housing sometime in the future.
Okay, so thank you very much for that, John. As I said before, we are in dialogue with CHIPs for Queensland. With CHIA. Oh gosh, it was a long night last night. We had the brick AGM, so forgive me. Would you please join me in thanking John for his contribution today? Okay, all right, so that really concludes the celebratory event. So I would ask you again to thank Liza Carroll for her attendance and for her contribution as well before we commence the business part of our annual general meeting. So please join me in thanking Liza. Okay, so we have a moment or two for people who aren't not intending to stay for the business of the AGM to sort themselves out now. So if you wouldn't mind just hanging on for a second. I think most people are staying, but a few are leaving now. So thank you for that. Okay. All right, let's make a start. So, welcome again, everybody, to the first annual general meeting. The first was the inaugural, thank you, was last year. Thank you. You see how we all work together. When my brain fades, everybody pitches in. So thank you for that. So, and also thank you to those watching remotely. It's really great. I feel really connected to those people who are joining us remotely, and I guess, I don't know why, but I didn't really expect to feel that. So it's great that you're able to join us, and we really do appreciate that you've taken the time out of your busy day to be here. So I have been advised that we have a quorum present, so I'm pleased to declare the meeting open. So each representative of a member delegate who signed in today would have picked up a blue voting card. So if there's any confusion about that, Kylie's over there in the background and she can sort you out. We have the blue voting card for where a poll is required on resolutions, and we'll obviously explain that voting procedure when we get to the resolutions segment of the meeting. We've also got proxies from 2 member organisations, and those are held by Kylie. So with the minutes of the 2015 inaugural general meeting being in order, they were signed by the chair and our table for information to the members. So if you would please note your acceptance of the minutes of the inaugural general meeting, that would be great. Yes, thank you. Okay, so it's been a big year for Chips for Queensland. It's been a big year, it feels like, for everybody. For Chips in particular, there are not just the challenges of managing an organisation and delivering on the needs of our membership, but also maintaining a proper connection and relationship between all of the members. But also we need to ensure that we are viable. You know, John spoke earlier today about the importance of organisations being able to fund their activities, and that's obviously critical for organisations who are member and sponsorship funded. So once again, I do acknowledge our sponsors. Without them, then we wouldn't be here. And they put not only their cash and in-kind resources, but their faith and commitment in us. So it's up to us to make sure that we meet their needs as well. Most of the sponsors are remaining with us, which is great. And we're also in discussion with some other people who may also make a contribution. So we look forward to that. I would like to just very quickly mention some of our achievements, and I think one magnificent achievement is the fact that we have such a great annual review, which does outline obviously the achievements through the year, but also our financial report. And so I draw your attention to this document, which I'm really proud of. I think it's come together really well. I would like to just highlight a couple of things from the report. So I think, as I've said in the Chair's report, there were challenges and opportunities in equal measure through the year. But the report actually demonstrates that in spite and because of those challenges and opportunities, we've actually had a really good year. So I do want to thank my fellow directors, and in particular Barry Shiplock, who is our treasurer, for all of the work that he has done this year on our finances and made them much easier and simpler to quickly grasp the information. So thank you, Barry. We really appreciate your contribution and your energy and willingness to do other things as well as be the money man. So thank you very much for that. I'd also like to acknowledge Kylie. As I say, I think most people in the room would be very familiar with Kylie now. She's always out and about, always busy, and she makes a wonderful contribution to Chips for Queensland. She really is the face of Chips for Queensland, and she is the person that people know the best. So thanks to Kylie, she's done a really great job. And it's down to Kylie and the team, particularly directors who, whilst they have a strategic imperative, are also always willing to roll up their sleeves and make things happen. And today is another example of that, including actually a former director who is here with us today, Emma, who unfortunately had to retire because of her changed work circumstances. But here she is today helping us out again. So it's really great that people stay connected and contributing. So I'll just quickly draw your attention to page 10 of the report, which gives you the year in review with the highlights of the period. So 450 members, associates and stakeholders attended the events. We held 4 successful events and very well attended events. We produced 10 Chips for Queensland e-news publications. And what I found really interesting, actually, which I don't think I'd properly appreciated, was the number of local government areas represented in our membership, which is 35. So that's a massive contribution by local government. So thank you all for that. I won't reference all of the other things, obviously, because it's there for you to take away and read. If you do have any questions or comments or feedback about things that we could do differently, better next year, then please let us know. We do want to be responsive to our members' and our sponsors' needs. So I would also like to formally welcome 2 new board members appointed in the second half of the year. These were board appointments, and both of those bring a really valuable experience and expertise to the role. So I'd like to formally welcome Anne-Marie Keane over here, and Barry, who I've also mentioned earlier. So Barry's seated next to Anne-Marie. So Anne-Marie is a partner at McGraw-Nicol, and Barry is managing consultant of the not-for-profit consultancy services. In addition, I would like to, I don't think Renee is here, is she? I haven't seen her. I would like to welcome Renee Clayton, who's filling in an alternate director position. So in her absence, I'd like to thank Renee for stepping up to the mark on that one. I would also obviously like to thank the 3 other directors who did have to retire from the board as their terms as alternate director expired, and those 3 directors are David Kent, Emma Plaisir, and Peter Marr. So thank you very much, all 3 of you, for your strong contribution and your continuing commitment to Chips for Queensland. We really, really do appreciate it. As you would expect, operating with a full complement of board directors is essential for an organisation to be robust, energetic, and to do what it needs to do. So it's great that we have such experience, expertise and enthusiasm on the board. So I would now like to introduce Barry Shiplock, who is going to say a few words about our finances.
Thank you, Gina, and thank you everybody for coming today. As a little bit of a self-introduction, as Gina said, I'd been involved in a number of other organisations prior to joining CHIPS as a director. Prior to 2000, I was in the dark side. I was in sort of senior marketing and general management roles in ASX 100 companies. But the niche that discovered me from 2000 onwards was in health and social services. And so I've been involved in the not-for-profit sector for that period of time. As well as my CHIPs directorship, I do have a couple of day jobs. I'm the CEO of the Australian Aphasia Association, which supports people with communication disabilities. But to wind the clock back to Gina's presentation about sort of innovation within the sector, I'm also on the board of Group 61, which you may recall were mentioned with the Churches of Christ Innovation Project, the SafeLink program. And if you had a chance to speed read down to the bottom of those slides, you would have seen the outcomes that came from that SafeLink program. What I will tell you about, though, we'll talk about, though, is that innovative projects are great, but they need to be sort of moved on. And what isn't mentioned about the project that that Group 61 shared with Churches of Christ is that model's now been picked up by 2 other organisations within South East Queensland, and they did that on the back of the successes that were evident in the Churches of Christ pilot program. So, as Gina said, go and have a look at the other projects that are there, and you will find something that you can replicate within your own area, within your own organisations. As Treasurer, I've got the enviable task of delivering the driest presentation out of today's, the people that have gone before me. As a new Director and Treasurer with CHIPS, I was aware that initially members took up expressions of interest to become members and that it was complimentary and that membership fees were going to be introduced later during the year. I have to say that I secretly harboured the thought that, well, that's going to be interesting. Let's see how that goes. But it gives me great pleasure to be able to say that almost to 100% of the people, the organisations that expressed an interest in becoming members of CHIPS of Queensland are now financial members. The couple that I know of, a couple that didn't rejoin as financial members, but that was because they had stepped out of the sector. Sorry, they had stopped providing community housing in their regions. So I really want to thank those members who are here now, and those that are on remotely, and those that are unable to attend. Thank them for their vote of confidence in CHIPS for Queensland goals and ambitions. And furthermore, also recognise the significant support that we get from our sponsors and the contribution that that's made to us as an organisation. Whilst CHIPS for Queensland is rated as a small organisation and therefore we're not required to submit audited reports, I've always taken the view with organisations in the sector that lift the bar a little bit and work on your compliance as if you were a mid-sized organisation, whether it be a charity or whatever. Because one day you may be there, and so you've already done the groundwork. So that what we've done, we've adopted guidelines that are for mid-sized organisations, and that's reflected in the financial statements and the audit reports that are in our annual review. It doesn't make terribly exciting reading. It's our first AGM, and so there is nothing to compare to for previous years. But I commend the reports to you, and I thank Grant Thornton for their assistance in providing audit for the audit, and also for Rachel Lai, who works for in Gina's organisation at BRIC, for her work prior to me coming on board. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Barry. I would like to really echo what Barry has said, that it is important that we think to the future, and while an audited financial report wasn't required, setting ourselves up for that is important, but it's also important in terms of transparency and accountability to our members and to our sponsors. So we've obviously taken that decision, and we thank Barry for getting all of that organised for us. So we now come to the more formal business of the meeting. So as the notice of the meeting has obviously been circulated, because you're all here, I'm just proposing to take that as read. I will need to give you a quick overview of the voting process, so I'll need to read this out to make sure that I don't miss anything out. So the voting instructions are, members have been provided with a blue poll voting card on arrival. If you have previously submitted a proxy voting form, which we're aware a couple of organisations have, your attendance will cancel your direct vote. So thank you for participating in the voting process. It really has been great to see the interest that we've got on the board, and for the second year running, we've ended up with a contested election, so members' votes are critically important. For members participating remotely and those unable to attend, all of those members have had the opportunity to cast their vote through the proxy process, so we do thank those people who took the trouble to do that. So we have received and counted the proxy votes, and the poll of today's votes from attendees in the room will be added to the existing tally of proxy votes. So I need to remind you that only representatives, the delegates of member organisations or their assigned proxies may vote today, and each eligible voter should have been given that blue voting card on arrival. So if you think that you have missed out on getting that card, and in fact you should have one, please ensure that you talk to to Carly and the people on the front registration desk. So we won't be going into all of the details of every resolution, because obviously we're assuming that you will have read the paperwork that was sent out in advance. But I would like to just open the floor to any questions pertaining to the resolutions when we do get to the formal business of the meeting. And again, could I ask that if you are speaking, that you speak into the microphone so that our remote attendees can properly hear you. So the process for the first resolution, we're seeking votes either for or against resolution 1. So Anne-Marie and Kylie will be counting and verifying. So now, oh, I'm sorry, did I miss something out? No? We're all sorted, yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Okay, so now resolutions 2 to 6, the directors' elections. So we've determined that this year this process will be conducted by poll. And so all members will be asked to vote on resolutions 2 to 6, and the poll papers will be collected and counted. The votes, most of the votes have been collected and counted prior to the meeting, and that was the purpose of giving you the voting slip on your way in. So that was the blue voting card. Is there anyone who has yet to complete their blue voting card? Thank you. So we'll just take a moment to tally those votes. So as you're aware, we had 5 candidates stand for 2 positions. So again, we're very delighted to have a contested election for the board. I think it's a testament to the fact that people are very keen to participate and very supportive of initiatives which connect us better together as providers in what's becoming an increasingly complex landscape in the provision of housing services. So it's great to be in this position. And for those people who have nominated and are not subsequently elected, there are plenty of opportunities to be involved anyway. So once we get your number, you don't escape, really. So I think we might nearly be there with our vote count. Yeah. I was chatting to someone at the networking event earlier, and they said, "Oh, are you going to do electronic votes?" It's like, it's nerve-wracking enough doing it this way. So perhaps we'll think about that for next year. Yeah, we're sorry this is taking a few moments, so we want to make sure that we get the votes recorded correctly, and that the process has been transparent. So are we good to go, Kylie?
Yes, so our votes are in. Thank you to everyone for voting. And we have passed 2 resolutions. So resolution 2 is the election of Andrew Elvin as director. And we've also passed resolution 5, the election of Joe Ahern as director.
Okay, that's terrific. The relief of not having a tie is tremendous. In our inaugural general meeting, we had a tie, and I had to exercise a casting vote, which was, well, it was a potboiler to start with. It was a very exciting election. Somewhat more sedate this time, thank goodness. But I do welcome both Andrew and Joe to their new roles. I think they will make a great contribution to Chips for Queensland, and we all look forward to working with them in future. So thank you for that. Thank you also to Anne-Marie, Kylie and Jamie for managing that process for us. That's excellent work, thank you. So now, we didn't have a tie. We've confirmed the election results. We've welcomed the members. So it's time really to close or bring the meeting to a close. So I would like to thank everybody for their contribution. I do want to thank our outgoing board members, David Canton and Emma Plaisir. Their contribution has been enormous. Peter Marr, in addition, who stood in at very short notice and made a great contribution too. So they will obviously remain connected to Chips for Queensland, and it's always a great pleasure to see them as they attend the various events and functions. So thank you very, very much for that. We really do appreciate your input. I would also like to thank the Director General in her absence, Liza Carroll, and John McInerney, who's kindly stayed with us for the less exciting bits. And to thank them for making time to be here today. I think everyone found the presentations very informative and interesting, and I'm sure that people will think of things that they want to ask. If you do that, you know where to go. That's the joy of having a web-based system for people to actually connect. So you don't need to wait for events to make your comments and contributions. So I'd also like to thank our guests from government, from our sector partners and supporters. I'd like to thank all of the membership for their participation, not just in the voting, but also in the first session and for questions. I do want to particularly acknowledge the people who are participating online. It really does make it much more vibrant and much more connected. And it's great to know that people who are in those more far-flung areas of the state don't have the expense, the resource investment and the time investment. They don't have to make that investment to fully participate in the organisation. So I really want to extend special thanks to those people for being here today. Once again, an acknowledgement and thanks to our sponsors, McCulloch Robertson Lawyers, Grant Thornton Auditors, IDEA Architecture, Transfield Services and SDM Housing Software. And so a final, again, congratulations and welcome to our new board, and thank you to the outgoing board members. The first meeting of the new board will be taking place on Friday, the 27th of November, and we'll obviously be, well, when I say we, I mean Kylie, will be in contact with you regarding some further information and some induction things for you. So once again, CHPs for Queensland encourages all community housing providers to get involved, whether you are the delegate or not. Please take the opportunity to connect. You will get enormous benefit from it. I can absolutely assure you of that. And you will connect with your colleagues. You'll help to shape what happens. Liza mentioned earlier that I'm the delegate in my role as chair of CHPs for Queensland on the reference group for the new housing strategy. That's been a really interesting process for me, and it's been a process of high engagement with the department. So that obviously has not always been the case with various governments. Their approach to engaging with us has been varied. But with this government, there is a really strong opportunity for us to partner and influence what happens. So we need to seize on those opportunities. And I'm enormously grateful for the opportunity to be a part of that discussion. With those last comments and there being no final items of business which we've left undone, I now declare the annual general meeting closed at 10:26 by the look of my watch. And thank you all for your attendance and interest, and we look forward to your continuing support and an exciting new year to come. Thank you very much indeed.